My brother stole my savings to impress his new wife while I worked double shifts, so I reported him and cut ties forever without regret. I'm a 29-year-old guy, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the responsible one in my family, the one who steps in when things get hard, especially when it comes to my younger brother, Daniel. Ever since we were kids, my parents treated him like he was made of glass. If he messed up, it was stress. If he failed, it was bad luck. If I succeeded, it was just what was expected of me. I learned early that my role wasn't to be celebrated, but to compensate. When Daniel skipped jobs or quit after a few months, I picked up extra shifts. When money got tight at home, my parents would sigh and look at me, not him. "You're the strong one," my mom would say. "You understand responsibility." I didn't feel strong. I felt cornered. For years, I worked double shifts, early mornings and late nights, coming home with aching feet and a head buzzing from exhaustion. I skipped vacations, said no to friends, and lived way below my means. Every dollar I saved felt like a small piece of future security. I didn't want luxury. I wanted stability. A place of my own. A life where I wasn't constantly bracing for someone else's mess. Daniel, on the other hand, burned money fast. New gadgets, nights out, impulse buys he couldn't explain later. Because of that, I kept my savings quiet. I mentioned it once, casually, during a family dinner when my dad joked about me being the rich one. I laughed it off and changed the subject, not realizing that moment would matter. Then Daniel met her. A whirlwind romance. Big gestures. Loud declarations of love. Less than a year later, he was engaged. The family was ecstatic. Plans started forming instantly: venues, rings, futures. I remember sitting there, listening to everyone talk over each other, feeling something shift in my chest. I couldn't explain it yet, but something about the way Daniel smiled that night made me uneasy. I didn't know then that my silence, my loyalty, and everything I'd built was already being quietly repurposed for someone else's dream, and that I was about to pay for it. The engagement changed everything almost overnight. Suddenly, every family conversation revolved around Daniel's wedding: what venue felt right, how many guests were acceptable, what kind of honeymoon would set the tone for their marriage. I mostly listened, nodding along while eating reheated leftovers after another double shift, my body running on caffeine and habit more than energy. That's when the comments started. They weren't direct at first. Just little remarks, slipped in between excitement and laughter. "Well, at least Daniel has you," my mom said one evening, smiling at me. "You've always been so good with money." My dad added, half joking, "Must be nice having savings in this economy." Daniel started asking questions too. Casual ones. Too casual. "How many hours are you working these days? Man, banks are brutal with fees, right? Do you still use that same account from years ago?" I brushed it off. I told myself he was just curious, that weddings made people anxious about money. Still, something about the way he watched me when I answered, too attentive, too interested, made my stomach tighten. Meanwhile, I kept grinding. Early mornings, late nights. I'd come home to an empty apartment, peel off my work boots, and sit in silence scrolling through my phone. Every few days, Daniel would post something new: expensive dinners, surprise gifts for his fiancée, sleek clothes I knew he couldn't afford. My parents loved it. "Look at him," my mom said proudly. "He's really stepping up." I wanted to believe that. I really did. His fiancée started treating me differently too. At family gatherings, she'd smile sweetly but say things like, "It must be comforting knowing you have someone responsible in the family," while glancing straight at me. Once, she laughed and said, "Every family needs a backbone." I didn't feel like a backbone. I felt like a safety net everyone was slowly leaning onto without asking. The expectations were forming in the air, unspoken but heavy. Help. Contribute. Don't be selfish. Be the reliable one, like always. And the more they talked about the wedding, the more I realized something terrifying. No one was asking if I would help. They were already acting like I had. The first red flag didn't come as a confrontation or a dramatic moment. It came quietly, late at night, when I was half asleep and scrolling through my phone in the dark. I remember my eyes burning from exhaustion, my body sinking into the mattress, when a bank notification popped up. It was small. Too small to panic over. Just a transfer notification I didn't immediately recognize. I frowned, opened my banking app, and stared at the screen longer than I should have. The amount wasn't huge, annoying, but not catastrophic. My first instinct wasn't anger. It was logic. Probably a pending charge, I told myself. Maybe a delayed bill. I was tired. I closed the app and rolled onto my side, convincing myself I'd look into it later. But later came with more questions. Over the next couple of weeks, Daniel's lifestyle kept escalating. Not gradually, suddenly. New watch. Weekend trips. Fancy restaurants with mood lighting and plated food that looked more like art than dinner. He'd flash photos at family gatherings, laughing loudly, soaking in the attention. My parents ate it up. Marriage has really matured him, my dad said proudly. Love looks good on him, my mom added. I sat there quietly, doing mental math I didn't want to do. His job hadn't changed. His hours hadn't increased. But his spending had exploded. When I mentioned how expensive weddings can be, my mom tilted her head and said, "Well, not everyone stresses about money the way you do." Daniel laughed and added, "Yeah, you worry too much, man. Life's short." That sentence stuck with me. Life's short. Easy to say when you're not the one waking up at 5 a.m. to cover extra shifts. A few days later, I checked my bank account again. Another unfamiliar transfer. Same pattern. Same calm panic settling into my chest. I scrolled back further and noticed something worse: consistency. Small amounts, spread out, almost careful. My pulse started pounding in my ears. I wanted to confront someone. Anyone. But I didn't. I told myself accusing family without proof would make me the villain. I told myself trust mattered more than paranoia. So I stayed quiet. And that silence gave whatever was happening exactly what it needed: time. I finally sat down to really look at my finances on a night when my body felt like it was shutting down. I'd just come home from another double shift, my clothes smelling like grease and cold air, my head pounding in that dull, familiar way that meant I'd pushed myself too far again. I told myself I'd shower and sleep, but instead I opened my laptop at the kitchen table. The numbers didn't make sense. At first, I thought I was misreading something. I refreshed the page. Then I logged out and back in. The balance was lower than it should have been, noticeably lower. Not catastrophic yet, but wrong. My stomach tightened as I started scrolling through transactions, line by line, my finger tracing the screen like I was afraid the numbers might move. There they were. Multiple transfers. Small enough to avoid triggering alarms. Spread out just enough to look ordinary. But they weren't ordinary. I didn't recognize the destinations. I didn't authorize them. I whispered, "What the hell?" to an empty room. My chest felt heavy, like the air had thickened around me. I checked dates. Times. Patterns. And slowly, painfully, I started matching them to moments I couldn't ignore. Transfers on weekends Daniel posted from luxury hotels. Charges right before expensive dinners showed up on his Instagram story. My hands started shaking as realization crept in, unwanted and sharp. I told myself it still could have been fraud. That made it easier to breathe. Easier than considering the alternative. The next day, I called my bank during my lunch break, pacing behind the building while co-workers smoked nearby. The representative's voice was calm, rehearsed. She confirmed the transfers were authorized using correct credentials. No forced entry. No flags. No disputes yet. "Have you shared your banking access with anyone?" she asked. I almost said no. Almost. Instead, a memory surfaced years ago, sitting beside Daniel at our parents' kitchen table, helping him set up an account when he was going through a rough patch. I'd logged in. Explained things. Trusted him. I ended the call early, my hands cold despite the sun beating down on my back. That night, I stared at my phone, hovering over Daniel's name. My heart was racing, my mind screaming for answers. But something told me that once I asked the question, there was no going back. I didn't confront Daniel right away. Instead, I did something I never thought I'd have to do with my own family. I investigated. Late nights turned into early mornings as I combed through bank statements, access logs, and old emails, my eyes burning while my chest stayed painfully tight. Every click felt like I was digging up something I didn't want to find, but I couldn't stop. That's when I saw it clearly. Years ago, when I helped Daniel set up his account, I'd unknowingly linked my information as a backup contact. Same email. Same recovery access. I trusted him without thinking twice, because why wouldn't I? He was my brother. But now, staring at the login history, I could see it logins from his city. At times I was either asleep or working. My hands started shaking so badly I had to set the laptop down. The amounts added up fast once I stopped lying to myself. Thousands. Money I'd earned through exhaustion, through missed birthdays and skipped meals. And it wasn't going toward emergencies. It was funding luxury. Engagement gifts. Venue deposits. A honeymoon package I recognized from a website he'd casually shown me weeks earlier. I felt sick. The worst part wasn't even Daniel, it was the pattern around him. Transfers lining up with family dinners where my parents encouraged me to relax about money. Comments about how Daniel finally had someone who believed in him. The way his fiancée once joked, "It's so nice knowing family always shows up." They knew. Or at least, they suspected. And no one warned me. I drove to my parents' house that night, my heart pounding the entire way. When I asked, carefully, if Daniel had mentioned borrowing money from me, my mom didn't look surprised. She just sighed and said, "You always make things sound so dramatic." That was the moment something inside me snapped. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't stress. It wasn't love gone wrong. It was a choice. Repeated. Calculated. And standing there, watching my parents protect him again, I realized the truth I'd been avoiding. I wasn't just being betrayed by my brother. I was being sacrificed by my entire family. I confronted Daniel 2 days later, alone, because some stupid part of me still hoped he'd come clean if no one else was around. We met at a coffee shop near his apartment, the kind with exposed brick walls and overpriced drinks. He looked relaxed, too relaxed, scrolling on his phone like nothing in the world was wrong. I didn't ease into it. I put my phone on the table and slid it toward him. "Explain these," I said, keeping my voice low even though my chest felt like it was on fire. He glanced down, barely reacting, then leaned back and sighed like I'd inconvenienced him. "Dude," he said, rubbing his face, "why are you being like this?" "Being like what?" I asked him how long he'd been taking money from my account. His expression hardened instantly. "Taking?" he scoffed. "I borrowed it." "You weren't using it." That sentence hit me harder than any insult ever had. I reminded him I never gave permission. He shrugged. "You have more than enough." I was going to pay it back after the wedding. When I asked when exactly that would be, he snapped, "Why are you acting like a victim?" My parents got involved that same night. Not to hear me out, but to shut me down. "Families help each other," my mom said sharply over the phone. "You're really going to ruin your brother's marriage over money?" My dad added, "You've always been obsessed with control." Then his wife texted me. Long paragraphs. Accusations. She said I was jealous. That I was trying to sabotage their happiness. That real men didn't count favors. I stared at the screen, hands numb. Somehow, I was the villain. The thief was the wounded party. The people who raised me were more worried about appearances than what had been done to me. I hung up. I stopped responding. I sat alone in my apartment, the silence pressing in, replaying every conversation, every sacrifice. And that's when I understood something terrifying. They weren't asking me to forgive. They were demanding I disappear quietly so no one else had to feel uncomfortable. The pressure didn't come all at once. It crept in, subtle and relentless, like water seeping through cracks you didn't know were there. My parents started calling more often, not to ask how I was, but to manage me. Every conversation felt scripted, like they were trying to wear me down through repetition. "Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be," my mom said one evening, her voice tight with forced calm. "You know how people talk," my dad added. This would destroy the family. Destroy the family. Not stealing from me. Not lying. Not months of manipulation. Me speaking up. Daniel sent messages too, alternating between guilt and anger. One minute it was, "I can't believe you'd do this to me," the next it was, "You're really going to embarrass us right before the wedding?" Every message carried the same underlying demand: stay quiet, take the hit, move on. I tried to keep working like nothing was wrong. Double shifts blurred together. My body ached constantly, but my mind was worse. I'd replay conversations while standing on my feet for hours, wondering how I'd become the problem in a situation I never created. Coworkers asked if I was okay. I lied and said I was just tired. At night, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone lighting up with missed calls. The walls of my apartment felt closer, heavier. I felt trapped between anger and obligation, like no matter what I chose, I'd lose something important. The worst part was the guilt. They knew exactly where to aim it. "He's your brother. We raised you better than this. Do you really want to be the reason everyone's ashamed?" I started questioning myself. Maybe I was being heartless. Maybe years of being the responsible one had turned me cold. That thought scared me more than the money. Then I opened my bank app again and saw my balance drop again. Something inside me cracked. Because in that moment, I realized silence wasn't keeping the peace. It was slowly destroying me. Rock bottom didn't come with screaming or drama. It came quietly, on a Tuesday morning, when my card declined at a gas station. I stood there staring at the screen like it had to be wrong, like the machine was glitching. I tried again. Same result. The cashier glanced at me, then looked away, pretending not to notice the heat rising in my face. I sat in my car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, heart pounding. I opened my bank app, already knowing what I'd see. My balance had dropped below the threshold I'd promised myself I'd never cross. Years of double shifts, of missed moments, of grinding myself down gone. Not because I was careless. Because someone else decided my money was theirs. I went to work anyway. I always did. 14 hours on my feet, moving on autopilot, smiling when required, barely hearing what anyone said to me. My body was there, but my mind was stuck on one image I couldn't escape. Daniel's wedding photos. They started popping up that evening while I was eating cold food at my kitchen counter. Candles. Champagne. A venue I recognized from the invoices I'd found. His wife in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And there he was, my brother, grinning like he'd earned every bit of it. Something broke in me then. I slid down the cabinet onto the floor, my back against the wood, staring at my phone as tears finally came. Not loud sobs. Just quiet, exhausted tears that felt like they'd been building for years. I felt stupid. Used. Replaceable. Like my only purpose had been to fund someone else's happiness. The worst part wasn't the money. It was realizing that if I stayed silent, this would never stop. There would always be another excuse. Another demand. Another sacrifice expected from me. For the first time, I stopped asking what they needed from me. And started asking what it would take to protect myself. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my table, laptop open, gathering everything: statements, dates, proof, my hands steady in a way they hadn't been before. Because somewhere between humiliation and exhaustion, fear turned into resolve. And once that happened, there was no going back. The next morning felt unreal, like I was moving through someone else's life. I showered, dressed, and went to work like normal, but everything felt muted, sounds duller, colors flatter. Inside, though, something was sharper than it had ever been. Calm. Focused. Final. During my lunch break, I didn't eat. I sat in my car and reviewed the files on my phone again. Bank statements. Login records. Screenshots of dates lining up with Daniel's spending. I'd labeled everything carefully, methodically, like I was handling evidence instead of proof my own family had betrayed me. My hands didn't shake anymore. That scared me a little. My phone buzzed. A text from my mom. "Please don't do anything you'll regret." I stared at the words for a long time. The irony almost made me laugh. I didn't respond. After work, instead of going home, I drove past my apartment and kept going. My heart started pounding as the building came into view, the sign out front glowing against the early evening sky. I sat in the parking lot for a full minute, breathing slowly, grounding myself. This was the line. Once I crossed it, there was no undoing anything. Inside, the air smelled like disinfectant and paperwork. The officer at the desk spoke calmly, professionally, like this was just another report. I told him I needed to report financial theft. Saying the words out loud felt surreal. When he asked who had taken the money, my throat tightened. "My brother," I said. He nodded and asked for documentation. I handed everything over, each page feeling heavier than the last. No one yelled. No one judged me. There was no dramatic reaction, just process, procedure, and seriousness. When I walked back outside, the sky was darkening. My phone buzzed again. Multiple missed calls. Messages piling up. I didn't check them. For the first time in months, my chest felt lighter. Not because it was over, but because I'd stopped letting fear make my decisions. I drove home knowing one thing for sure. Whatever came next, my family would never look at me the same way again. Things unraveled faster than I expected. I thought there would be weeks of silence, maybe months of tension before anything really happened. I was wrong. 2 days after I filed the report, my phone exploded while I was at work. Missed calls. Voicemails. Texts stacked on top of each other like a flood I couldn't stop. I didn't listen to them until my shift ended. The first voicemail was from my mom, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before. "What did you do?" she whispered, like saying it louder might make it real. Then came my dad, angry, sharp, panicked. He accused me of blindsiding the family, of humiliating them, of going too far. He never once asked if I was okay. Not once. The final message was from Daniel. He wasn't confident anymore. He wasn't smug. He sounded scared. "They froze my accounts," he said, his voice cracking. "I can't access anything. You need to fix this. Now." I sat on the edge of my bed listening to that message twice, my heart pounding but my face completely still. I imagined him standing there, finally powerless, realizing that charm and guilt couldn't talk him out of this. For the first time, he was facing something he couldn't manipulate. Over the next few days, the truth spilled out whether anyone wanted it to or not. His wife found out how much money was taken and from who. I heard through a cousin that the honeymoon had been cancelled. Vendors started calling. Questions were asked that no one could dodge. My parents tried damage control, calling extended family, rewriting the story. But facts don't bend the way emotions do. Paper trails don't care about loyalty. Daniel showed up at my apartment one night, pounding on the door, begging me to talk. I stood on the other side, listening, my hand hovering over the lock. I didn't open it. Because for the first time, the chaos wasn't mine to absorb. It was theirs. And as the noise outside slowly faded, one thing became painfully clear. They had built their happiness on the assumption that I would never fight back. The calls slowed down after that. Not because they understood, because they ran out of leverage. There were no more guilt buttons left to press, no threats that still worked. I stopped answering altogether, letting the silence stretch longer each day, heavier and more deliberate. I met with the bank and investigators again, signing documents, answering questions, reliving details I'd rather forget. Some of the money was recoverable. Some of it wasn't. That part hurt more than I expected, but by then, I'd already accepted that this wasn't just about dollars. It was about drawing a line that should have been there years ago. Daniel sent one last message. No apology. Just anger. You really destroyed everything, he wrote. I stared at it for a long time, then deleted it without replying. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt clarity. My parents tried a different approach after that, quieter, softer. They talked about forgiveness. About moving forward. About how family is all we have in the end. I told them, calmly, that I needed space. Real space. Not a break. Not a pause. Distance. My mom cried. My dad went silent. I didn't argue. I didn't explain myself again. I'd already done that my whole life. I blocked Daniel's number. Then I muted my parents' calls. Each tap of the screen felt heavier than the last, like closing doors I'd been holding open out of habit, not hope. I expected guilt to hit me like a wave. It didn't. What I felt instead was unfamiliar and unsettling. Relief. No more bracing myself when my phone buzzed. No more rehearsing conversations in my head. No more being the responsible one who cleaned up everyone else's mess. I started sleeping through the night for the first time in months. One evening, as I sat alone on my couch, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt earned. Still, part of me wondered if the fallout was really over, or if cutting ties would cost me more than I was ready to admit. Months passed, and life slowly started to feel different. Quieter, yes, but lighter too. I changed my routine first. Fewer double shifts. More rest. I started saying no without explaining myself, and every time I did, it felt like reclaiming something that had been taken from me long before the money ever was. The financial recovery wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Enough to breathe. Enough to plan again. I set up new accounts, new safeguards, and for the first time, my savings actually felt like mine. No hidden access. No shared responsibility. Just boundaries I should have had years ago. Word eventually reached me through distant relatives. Daniel's marriage didn't survive the investigation. Trust collapsed the moment the truth came out. My parents tried to spin it as unfortunate circumstances, but no one listened the way they used to. The family narrative fractured without me there to hold it together. I thought hearing that would hurt. Instead, I felt calm. One afternoon, I walked past a real estate office and stopped to look at the listings. Small places. Modest. Mine. I imagined coming home to a space that didn't carry anyone else's expectations. A place where peace wasn't conditional on how much I gave. I realized then that reporting my brother wasn't about revenge. It was about choosing myself in a family that never had. Justice wasn't loud. It didn't look like celebration or triumph. It looked like silence that no longer scared me. I don't wonder anymore if I did the right thing. I don't replay the conversations. I don't imagine alternate endings where everyone suddenly understands. Some bridges don't collapse by accident. They collapse because they were built on sacrifice from only one side. And walking away from that, without regret, was the first truly responsible thing I'd ever done for myself.